Okay, so let's go over sending out attendance calls using the SFTP server option. So I'm going to open up my SIS integration option, and you'll find that I have Aeries connected already. It's just the Aeries demo server, so it doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't pull any substantial data or anything like that. However, if you have like Powerschool or Skyward or something like that, this method will work out all the same. If you don't have an SIS connected, it will work very similar, with the only caveat being that you have to map more data. So let's go ahead and head over to attendance calling, and you'll see I can choose to send out from Aeries or SFTP. I'm going to click this tab here, and you'll see select the file that contains the following attendance data. So since I have an SIS connected, all I really need is a file that has the student IDs and the school IDs and possibly an attendance marking or description. If you don't have an SIS connected, if you have none selected here, but you have phone service set up, you could still use the SFTP option, but this list here is going to contain a lot more data. We're going to require a lot more data that's being pulled from the server. So first thing we're going to do is get the SFTP server connected, and we're just going to go step by step. You'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, and then a little description on what we're going to do. So we're going to connect the SFTP server and select the file that houses the attendance data. So I'm going to walk through that here. So host name, which sometimes just a flat name like this, or sometimes it's an IP address. It really depends. Mine just happens to be a regular name called AlexDev. It's my development SFTP server. And I'm going to use my username. For port, I'm going to put 22. Now 22 is the default for using SFTP. If your SFTP server is configured differently and it goes through a different port, you're going to want to enter that in here. If this doesn't mean anything to you, just put port 22. It's like I said, it's the default. It typically works out, but some people are kind of paranoid and they set port 22 to be rejected. But if you're not sure, just put port 22. That's fine. This path to attendance SFTP. So this is where in your SFTP the attendance file is located. If it's located at the root, you're just going to put a forward slash here. I'm going to do SFTP files forward slash. You want to make sure to include any forward slashes. This is just a directory in my SFTP server where I have all my SFTP files for this particular, this particular feature. Lastly, I'm just going to put in a password, or my password, I should say. And this is required. We cannot leave this blank. Um, okay, I think that's it. Let's try connecting. So it's connecting right now, and the file showed up on the right hand side here. It's weird. I was expecting a success message. Okay, so these are the files I have in my SFTP server right now. You'll see like a school CSV, so this has all the schools data that I use, all the student data that I use, guardians data, and attendance data. And just to give you an insight on what my attendance data looks like, this isn't how yours should be formatted. This is how mine is formatted. So I'm going to click and drag this into view. Okay, so this is a very rudimentary type of file. So you'll see on the first column I have student ID, the second column I have student first name, if I can stretch that all the way, and then student last name. Yours can be first last name, or first and last name in the same column. It doesn't have to be formatted like this. Next you'll see I have periods 0 through 9. Again, you don't have to have yours like this. You could have a standard column. Let me insert column, oops, wrong way. Insert entire column. So you could have just an attendance mark. And then we can actually start doing like W, X, T, uh, just fill this up with, if I can use my Excel skills. So we can just fill this up with different markings, and we can just use this attendance mark for sending. That works out fine also. It doesn't really matter. Let me delete this one. Okay. Then I have parent name, phone number, the description. This is the attendance description. We'll just say that no matter what the marking they receive, it's just an absent. I could detail this out and say like W's are absence, and then X is unexcused absence, T is tardy, M is might be late or something like that. This is just the description for the attendance marking. Then is the school ID and the school name. So this is just how I'm choosing to format my particular attendance data. Yours might be vastly different. Since I have the SIS connected, all I need is student ID and school ID. But I'm going to show you how I can use this period 0 through 9 as a filter. So I'm going to move that back. Okay, I'm going to select attendance data.csv and I'm going to hit save file. So it's going to go through a process of retrieving the file. So it's going to reconnect to your SFTP, pull the file with the specified pathway, and then load in the headers. So if I bring this back in, it's going to load in all of these headers that I have in the first row here. Okay, you see it's loading mappings, and now it's successful. Okay, so everything's connected just fine. I can close down this first option and load up the data mapping. Okay, cool. So this is the data mapping. If this looks a little bit weird, don't worry, we're going to walk through it. We have our boxes for student ID, school ID, and then the optional attendance description. So this is reminiscent of this option up here. Again, if you don't have an SIS connected, if you have none selected, it will require a lot more options or a lot more data. So this data mapping is going to fill up with a bunch of different boxes. So I'm going to go ahead and map these, and I do that by clicking and dragging, let's say student ID to student ID, because the student ID column has all these student IDs, and they just happen to be all the same. And then the school ID maps to the school ID. And then I can take the attendance description for this option here. I can use this description column. It's a little weird to use like period 0 or period 1. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That's why I have the description option. However, if you leave this blank, you'll find that it defaults to say absent if you leave that blank. So we can choose to map one, or we can choose to not map one. You may have noticed that we have this filter SFTP option, and that's what that period 0 through 9 is for. So we can toggle this option if we need to filter by a column set. So I'm going to bring that back in one more time. So some of these have W's, some of these has X's or M's or T's. I think that's all. Yeah. So let's say I just want to send out to everyone that has an X marking. And that's the reason why we have that filter option. So if I don't filter this, everyone on this list, everyone in this entire listing here will receive a phone call that says, your student has been marked absent or something like that. But that doesn't make a whole lot of sense for those that are marked
really trying
tardy.
to retrieve this file.
They're not absent, they're tardy. So in an effort to prevent misinformation, you can provide a filter
It's probably because I
that will only
connected
choose
it twice.
the rows of data that have a certain marking or that follow a certain condition.
Okay,
that's the key there. Yeah. So I'm going to choose filter SFTP. So filters work on the basis of the OR conditional. If that doesn't make any sense to you, I can denote any amount of filters I want, and it works with filter 1 or filter 2
again.
or filter 3.
You see, it
So
saves
what
the
that means
information
is
every
I can
time we
put
do
down
something, and
if
it did save
period
the file,
0
just
through
didn't
9
notify me.
have an X marking, or
I must have something
period
wrong.
0 through 9 have a W marking, and it'll combine those conditions and pull a set of data that satisfy those conditions. So you kind of have to do a little bit of logic here.
Authentication failed.
Right off the bat here, we have
so I am getting
filter 1,
an error. I'm probably
and we
using
specify
the
the
wrong
column.
password.
So
Caps
if
lock is
I
on.
say I want to notify everyone who has period 9 with an X, and that's just
probably
this one
why
column or row 13 there.
it failed last time.
So I would say period 9 is X. And then that'll just pull that one row 13.
Okay.
So if I want to
Okay, that one
specify
connected.
period
Now
0
through 9.
with it successfully
I'm going to
connected,
toggle
we'll
this
save this
filter
file
as a
range, and this will just check all the values in a range of columns. So period 0 from period 0 to period 9, and I can say, is an X, or I could also say contains X. Contains is a bit more derivative, as in, it just has to include that X marking. And it is case sensitive, so these are capital X's and capital W's, so I have to make sure that I include a capital X or capital W. So if I say from period 0 to period 9 is X, well, that's going to include, number 3 here. That's going to include number 10 here, if I can control click. And that's going to include 13 and 14 as well. So it's going to go through these rows of data. And if period 0 through period 9 do not have an X, it will pull, or it will remove them from the list of senders, essentially. So it's only going to notify these 4 people. Now, conversely, I could change this to is not X, and that's, 3, 10, 13, and 14. It's pretty much going to flip that. So 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, and 12 will be notified because they don't have X's in the period 0 through period 9. So that's essentially what this filter is for. If you want to specify a certain criteria to send out to. I'm going to go ahead and say is X, and I'm going to keep that how that is, and I'm going to toggle set mappings. Okay, mappings have been saved. Now I can move on to call configuration, and so here we specify what time we want this to be sent out to, and what message we want to actually put or send out. So this is a little bit weird because we have, if I zoom in a little bit, we have these kind of brackets, student F name, student L name. These are just placeholders. So what that basically means is as it pulls the data in, the student first name is going to be put in place of that student F name there, and then the last name respectively. Since I have an SIS connected, it's going to pull the student information from the student ID. From the API rather than from the actual CSV that we just saw. So the one I'm actually going to remove, attendance status is going to default to absent, so I can just leave that there, or I can actually type in absent. One that is not shown here is the school name. So this is a message from, we can actually remove this and type in brackets school underscore name. And so that will pull the school name from the school ID from the API, or we could, map the actual school name there as well. So that's going to put that in place of here. Okay, so we're going to make sure that we hit complete message, and that's going to save our message for us. And then we can move on to summary. And this is just going to provide a summary for us. So we see like filters. It says period 0 through period 9 is equal to X. This is our mapping. Student ID maps to student ID. School ID maps to school ID. This is our message. And we can hit schedule, and that'll actually schedule our call to be sent out. There's also a save all button, and that'll just run through each of these options, and then we could actually from there, it'll actually run through each of them and then save all of them as well. You'll just want to make sure that you have your SFTP server connected.